I was 26 the year it finally happened, a year marked by crossed fingers, long phone calls, and plans that always seemed to unravel. But this time? Destiny gave in. My best friend, Rima, and I had spent years dreaming about Coachella, promising we'd someday make it to that sun-baked, electrified slice of musical heaven. There was always something standing in the way: money, managers ignoring our vacation requests, grown-up responsibilities. But in the spring of that year, we finally made good. Tickets in hand. Bags packed. Both of us giddy, anxious, and not exactly sure what we were getting ourselves into. We landed in California under clear skies, rented a tiny Airbnb not far from the festival grounds, 2 cramped rooms, a leftover whiff of bleach, and sunlight spilling through the dusty blinds. It barely fit us and our luggage, but we didn't care. The real adventure waited beyond those walls. The morning of the first day, we walked through make-believe gates and straight into another universe. It really was like tumbling down a rabbit hole. Nowhere in sight was the world we'd left behind. There were crowds that moved in shimmering waves, people wrapped in feathered, glittered fantasies, all in clothes that probably made perfect sense in a world this wild. Bass lines crashed over us from all corners, the air heavy with laughter and the whiff of overpriced food. For Rima and me, used to little local concerts and tiny music bars with sticky floors, this was a different planet, and we were happy to be aliens in it. Those first 2 days felt like a riot. We were on our feet for hours, pushing through seas of strangers, making it a point to see as many acts as we could, taking pictures every hour so we'd have proof this wasn't all a shared hallucination. We even timed our day around which food trucks to try and which murals to pose in front of, knowing full well we'd be too tired to remember half of it by the time the sun went down. And we were right. Every night it was the same: stumbling home, head spinning, shoes muddy, smiling at nothing on the walk back. By day 3, we were drained, running on nerves, energy drinks, and that desperate urge not to waste 1 second. It was the last day. The one we'd save for something special. Before the trip, Rima had floated the idea of bringing a little Molly, just for fun. Only on the last day, if we even feel like it, she'd said. Neither of us were wild partiers. I'd tried it once ages ago, found it mostly harmless, and so when the time came, I agreed. Why not? It felt a bit like honoring a festival tradition. So, that afternoon, chasing sunlight between 2 stages, we finally took the plunge. I remember thinking nothing felt immediately different, not at first. The grounds hummed with music and people, and for a while, nothing was out of the ordinary. Guess I got the weak stuff, I joked to Rima, hoping for a laugh. She flashed a crooked smile and said she felt nothing either, shrugging it off just as quickly as I tried. But as the sun dropped behind the palms and shadows stretched across the festival, things started to shift. At first, it felt good, a pleasant floaty feeling, the music blooming deeper under my skin, the colors sort of burning around the edges of everything. I was smiling at things that didn't make sense: a stranger's hat, the way someone danced with their eyes closed, the way time seemed to crack open. I understood for the first time why people emptied their wallets for weekends like this. Then, there was something else, not good, not bad, just odd. I began to notice a man. Not at first, not as someone to be afraid of, but as a presence. He was older than most people there, probably mid-30s, which made him stick out: shoulder-length black hair, a shadow of a beard, dressed head to toe in black. Black shirt, black pants, even his shoes worn and out of place among the bright colors and costumes. He wasn't doing anything weird, just standing still in a moving river of bodies about 20 feet off to my right, watching. The first time, I brushed it off. There were thousands of people at Coachella. Everyone looks familiar when you're surrounded by strangers. But there he was again, a little later, near a bar as Rima and I waited for water. I saw him again by the drinks tent, then again while we crossed between stages, the crowd thinning, the air twisting hot and cold. Always close enough to spot, never close enough to confront. 4 times, 5 times, always in a different place but somehow always not far from wherever we ended up. It was beginning to gnaw at me, the edge of paranoia prickling as the afterglow of the festival turned sharp and metallic in my blood. I leaned into Rima each time, whispering about the man in black, but she just waved it off, said it was probably the Molly or just festival jitters. Maybe Rima was right. Maybe it was just the festival, or the chemical swirl in my veins, making me too aware of things that didn't matter. But that's the thing about paranoia, it doesn't need evidence, just repetition. And every time I caught sight of the man with those tired, searching eyes, everything bright around me dulled a little bit more. All the old tricks didn't work. I tried to laugh it off, distract myself with the chaos of music and lights, even snapped a few more photos hoping seeing myself having a good time would persuade my mind to be quiet. But there he was, always, orbiting just outside the comfortable blur, his gaze not aggressive, not even really interested, almost vacant, as though he was remembering something I hadn't done yet. As we inched closer to the stage for one more must-see set, my heart started to stutter. I told myself it was the tiredness, or the heat, or maybe just too much caffeine and not enough water, but my jaw clenched so hard I worried I'd chip a tooth. My hands trembled at my sides, hidden by the crowd, and sweat rolled down the back of my neck. Every time a shadow moved or a stranger laughed too loudly, I flinched. This was supposed to be the highlight, music pulsing through my chest, the world spinning in time with the bass, but now I'd caught the edge of something else. Reality slipping through my fingers. Eventually, as dusk melted into full night and every bit of magic started to feel tinged with threat, I realized I needed to get out of the crowd. I told Rima I was feeling off, too dehydrated or maybe hungry, and she didn't argue. My words were slurred, distant even to my own ears. She grabbed my wrist, the only familiar thing in the world, and we pushed through the ocean of people toward the edges, looking for grass and air. But before we reached the safety of open space, the man in black appeared again, this time much closer, almost in front of me. He smiled, slow and uncertain, like he'd finally gotten up the nerve to say something after watching for hours. I felt everything in me freeze, the auditory overload, the heat, the fear wrapped tight around my ribs. He said, quietly, almost kindly, "Hey, you look amazing tonight." His voice barely rose above the mix of 1,000 overlapping songs, but the words felt needle-sharp. He glanced over at Rima and asked if we were together. My answer tumbled out, a tangle of nerves. "Yeah, we're together, just here to have fun," and I put on my best fake smile, desperate to keep things normal. He didn't move closer, didn't say anything threatening, just lingered, his smile flickering, unmoored. I grabbed Rima tighter and started to drift away, pulling her by the hand like we were tethered kids. And for a moment, blessedly, he was gone in the swirl of bodies. But something was still wrong. The music that had felt heavenly an hour ago became harsh and grating, every sound turned up to an unbearable volume. I heard my blood pounding in my own ears, louder than the DJ. My vision warped at the edges, the festival lights bleeding and quivering against each other. The ground felt alive under my feet, the grass too soft, too insubstantial, as though I might fall through any second. I told myself it was the exhaustion, everything catching up, the lack of sleep, the endless walking, the sunburn, the alcohol, the adrenaline turning sour. But none of that explained the sense of being watched even after he was out of sight. It was like being haunted by a ghost who hadn't died yet. We finally found a quiet corner on the edge of the field and collapsed. I sat down so hard I nearly tipped over. Rima hovered over me, a note of panic breaking through her otherwise steady calm. I told her I needed a break, needed water, maybe just to close my eyes. The noise kept swelling, circling, a storm pressing in from every side. I pulled out my phone, thinking maybe if I called someone, even just my own voicemail, I could anchor myself. But reception was terrible, every call dropping after one ring. After endless tries, I finally got through to Rima, who was off getting water. My voice cracked as I told her where I was and that something felt wrong, really wrong. She found me after what felt like hours but was probably just minutes. She recognized instantly that I wasn't okay. "Let's go now," she said, her voice steely and certain. I nodded, too tired to protest, and we started walking past the rowdy lines, past the thumping lights, away from the music, away from that ever-present sense of being observed. Every step out of the festival grounds felt like moving uphill, like the air itself was viscous, pressing against us. Sound chased us out, the wind, the music, the crowds, even our own footsteps seemed too loud. I looked back just once, half expecting to see the man in black watching us leave, but he didn't materialize. We slipped through the gates, into the night, onto the street where a shuttle waited, windows steamed and headlights glaring. We barely said a word on the bus ride back. Exhaustion had dissolved us into silence. The shuttle rattled along the darkened streets, festival-goers packed tight around us, wild energy dissipating into a heavy, collective fatigue. Outside, neon colors bled through the windows, but inside, there was only the comforting drone of engine and the soft hum of strangers' voices, an anchor after the chaos. When we finally got back to our Airbnb, Rima threw off her shoes and headed for the tiny bathroom, muttering something about needing to scrub off the entire day. I flopped face first onto my bed, feeling every muscle in my body protest. It was only then, stripped of the crowds and relentless music, that the emptiness of the little apartment felt immense. The safe walls, the cozy beds, none of it could fully block out that strange sense that the world outside was still watching, waiting. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that maybe I'd just mixed too many things: Molly, alcohol, dehydration, overload, the bright enormity of it all doing weird things to my head. That's what I wanted to believe. But lying there in the dark, the thoughts kept looping, the blurry images of the man in black every time I closed my eyes. Rima eventually poked her head into my room and asked if she should start packing for the morning. But all I could do was mumble that I'd handle it in the AM. My bones felt like they were made of dust, every part of me heavy with relief to be off my feet but buzzing with leftover fear. She didn't push. I think she knew I wasn't myself. I just wanted to sleep and erase the day. But even with the lights out, exhaustion couldn't deliver me to rest. Instead, I hovered on the edges of awareness, half awake, half lost to dreams that morphed into reality. At some point, I must have drifted off, because my next memory is of a sound, or maybe just a tension, that hardwired signal that something was wrong. My heart hammered from nowhere. I opened my eyes into darkness. For a second, draped in that half-awake confusion, I thought someone was standing in my door. Tall, motionless, head just below the frame. I tried to blink it away, thinking it was Rima. I even whispered her name, but the silhouette didn't move. Then I saw it. The shape was broader, taller, and much too still. It didn't fit. And there, in the faint light leaking in from the hallway, I saw his face. Even shadowed, I knew it was the same man from the festival. He just stood there, staring at me with eyes that looked almost curious, as if waiting for me to speak or move. My blood went cold. I screamed, louder than I'd thought possible, convulsive, desperate, grabbing for my blanket and throwing it over my head like a shield. My heart tried to punch a hole through my chest. Rima burst in, flipping on the lights, her voice high with panic. With the flood of brightness, the room was empty. No one but us. The door open, the shadow gone. Tears burned my eyes as I stuttered out what I'd seen: the man, right there, in my doorway, but I could see Rima fighting to hold on to logic, her mouth pinched with worry and confusion. She said it was the drugs, that I must have still been hallucinating, but I could hear the undercurrent of fear in her voice, the disbelief battling against the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth. I wanted to believe her so badly. But I couldn't unfeel that ice in my veins. This wasn't a dream. It felt as real as the wall behind me, the night outside our fragile little shelter. "Can you stay with me?" I asked, feeling vulnerable, childish even. Rima nodded and crawled into the bed beside me. We kept the lights on in the hallway, the unfamiliar hush between us broken only by soft whispers. Terror gave way to the comfort of simple presence, and at some indeterminate hour when even fear tires itself out, we both drifted into an uneasy sleep. When morning struggled its way into the room, it brought with it a chilling sense of unease, rather than relief. Sunlight spilled crooked and pale across the far wall, illuminating the mess of suitcases and crumpled clothes. For a few heartbeats, I couldn't remember where I was, or why the tightness in my chest felt like it had been there all my life. Then I saw Rima, still in her jeans, curled beside me on the bed with her eyes open and tired. She was already awake, staring at nothing, her hand clenched around her phone as if she'd kept guard all night. We were supposed to pack, check out, catch our flight, head home and write it off as another wild weekend. But there was no trace of who we'd been when we arrived, just two girls who wanted music and memory. Now everything was tinged with suspicion, as if every sound was a warning. It took a moment to shake loose from sleep. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit and ache of a night half lost to fear. I sat up, called Rima's name, and as she started to move I saw her flinch at a noise from the hallway. The entire apartment felt colder, as if the air itself was bracing for something. She offered a weary half-smile. "Ria, it's okay. We should pack. Let's check on everything first, okay?" It sounded rational, but I could tell she didn't fully believe it. Still, we performed the ritual of anxiety, checked the front door latch, the flimsy window locks, every closet, every nook. Not a thing out of place. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, but the tension only grew. My hand shook as I zipped my bag, nausea rolling in my stomach. We picked up what little trash we'd left behind and gathered our chargers, phone adapters, all the little pieces of normal life. But just as we were readying to leave, something caught my eye by the door, a faint scuffed patch in the dust. It could have been anything, I told myself. But all I could picture was the man in black standing at my bedroom door, shoes planted on that very spot. I forced myself to ignore it, not give that fear more space in my mind. Still, my pulse hammered, a silent warning. Neither of us wanted to linger. We left early, hours ahead of our flight, dragging our bags over the gravel drive. My head spun in the morning heat. The Uber ride to the airport was a blur, Rima whispering almost mantra-like that it was over, that nothing had actually happened. But I watched every car behind us in the rearview, every stranger on the curb, my heart leaping at shadows that didn't mean a thing. Back home, I tried to slip into routine. There weren't any news stories about break-ins or prowlers at Coachella. No emails from Airbnb about strange complaints or warnings. It should have been over. But sleep became uneven, shallow, and littered with half-dreams, every creak of my apartment building now suspect. When Rima called a few days later, her voice sounded smaller, further away. "I keep thinking I see him, too," she said. The admission sat heavy between us, somehow both a relief and a new source of terror. Over weeks, the fear sharpened and blurred. I told myself it was my mind's way of processing trauma, PTSD, call it what you will. I saw that silhouette in the doorway after every late night, every time I let myself be alone long enough to check. I locked windows twice. I put a chair under my apartment door handle, a habit that I knew was more for comfort than actual safety. But I never talked about it with anyone else, not really. The story of a creepy guy at a festival just doesn't have the ring of truth to anyone who's never felt terror curdle in the back of their throat. What stuck with me most wasn't what happened at the festival, but the knowledge that sometimes, someone looks at you not because you're special, but because you're simply there, and that's enough for bad intentions. Months later, another invitation came. An old friend, Jordan, wanted me to join her and her family down in San Diego for a weekend. Maybe a change of scene would help, she'd said. Beach, sun, friends, a chance to shake loose the last ghosts. My parents pushed for it, urging me to get back out into the world, to prove to myself that I was okay. So, off I went. Cross-country flight, headphones pressed tight to squeeze out the anxiety. I watched cities blur beneath the plane, tried to imagine myself at ease. Jordan met me at the airport with her father, smiling, easygoing, the kind of people who make you feel welcome even as a guest in their world. They'd borrowed an old silver Honda for the trip. I remember watching palm trees flicker by in the windows, a hush broken only by the radio and Jordan's laughter. Their beach house was beautiful, perched near the waves, sunlight rippling through every window. My room was tucked beneath the others, with a private view of the dunes and the endless sweep of the ocean, a quiet place that seemed as far from fear as any place could be. I let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. There's a kind of peace specific to a new place, the weight of other people's lives embedded in the furniture, the soft thrum of waves as the world turns elsewhere. In San Diego, at Jordan's family home, I let my nerves retreat under the comfort of ordinary hospitality. Her mother, Evelyn, introduced herself with a warmth that instantly settled some of my unease, and even Jordan's younger brother, Milo, delivered a teasing smile as he handed me an extra blanket. I clung to those gentle gestures, small reminders that most people want nothing more than to make you feel safe. After I dropped my suitcase in the guest room, I let tired bones sink into the armchair by the window. Just beyond the glass, I could see the soft march of sand leading toward the ocean, the occasional figure wandering the beach, footprints smudged by the rising tide. The salt in the air pressed gently into my skin. For the first time in recent memory, I thought, maybe normal is possible again. Jordan wasted no time. Despite travel fatigue, she was already on her feet, eager to show me the best beach sunset on the West Coast. She ducked away to change, calling over her shoulder for 15 minutes of patience. I nodded, half smiling, wanting to believe it all, the safety, the optimism, the clean slate of a new place, with friendly faces not yet marked by suspicion. We made our way through town and out to the crowded sand, sunlight stretching into gold. Jordan was relentless about taking photos, insisting, cajoling, posing atop dunes and beside brittle beach grass, her happiness genuine and infectious. I obliged, snapping shot after shot as she experimented with angles and laughter. At first, it felt silly, the kind of thing I'd lost touch with, careless and free. But reviewing the photos, I noticed something strange, a figure at the edge of every frame. Sometimes barely visible behind her, sometimes off to the left, always just far enough back to be incidental or accidental. At first, I thought it was one of the many sunseekers scattered along the coast, but as the sequence built, the man's presence became more deliberate than coincidental. A dark coat, slouched shoulders, posture rigid despite the beach's lazy charm. He lingered behind us through at least a dozen shots, weaving through the crowd just as we shifted our spot again and again. A bolt of cold slid through my stomach. I scanned the beach, looking for anyone matching his outline. There was only the ambient sea of people, families dousing kids with sunscreen, couples reading or sharing drinks, surfers dragging boards uphill. The figure was gone. I pressed my lips shut, not wanting to infect Jordan's joy with paranoia. Not yet, not again. Maybe it was just an unlucky trick of time, a tourist looping in and out of other strangers' shots. Maybe my eyes were looking for patterns where none existed. We stayed for another hour. The sun ducked lower, painting the sky pink and orange. Jordan's best friend, Cassie, joined us, full of stories and local jokes. I let myself get swept up, letting the day blur over my sharpened nerves. But now and then, in corners of conversation, I kept glancing down the coast, searching for the shape of that dark coat. After a while, Cassie drove us back. Jordan was insistent, "Why don't you want to go back and watch the stars come out?" But I deflected, feigning exhaustion, hoping no one would notice the edge to my voice. In the quiet of my guest room that evening, I locked the door, shut the curtains, and flicked through those images again, frame by frame, the man's outline becoming an accusation I couldn't ignore. That night, after everyone else had gone out to dinner, I kept replaying the afternoon. The soft tap of something against the window, the hush of surf, the memory of a face half glimpsed. As dusk gave way to full darkness, fatigue came for me, pulling me under scattered dreams until I woke abruptly to the sense that something was wrong again, that ancient, cautionary shiver, the body's memory of fear more certain than anything my mind could rationalize. It was the kind of awakening that leaves you gasping, heart racing, muscles tense, drenched in confusion about where you are and what time it could possibly be. I sat upright in bed, the thin guest blanket tangled around my legs. My phone screen flashed, 12:41 a.m. Outside, I could just make out the sigh of ocean wind cycling through the cracks of the old windows. I held my breath, hoping I'd simply been startled by my own anxious mind. But then came another sound, a light, rhythmic tapping. At first, I told myself it was the branches outside. The sea breeze. Anything but what sounded like knuckles on glass. I lay perfectly still, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause, the kind of silence that grows heavy until it suffocates the air between moments. Again tap, tap, faster now, urgent and deliberate. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over Jordan's contact, before my logical brain interrupted, "Don't overreact." Not again. Everyone was just a floor above, laughing over late-night board games or lost in conversation, completely oblivious to the tight coil of dread winding its way through me. I stared hard at the curtains, pulse thundering, half expecting to see the silhouette of someone outside. Courage and fear argued on my tongue, urging me to call upstairs, then pleading for me to stay silent. I edged off the bed, every muscle taut, and inched toward the window. My legs felt foreign, as if the ground itself might lurch out from under me. With trembling fingers, I snapped the lock shut with an audible click. The tapping stopped instantly, as if whoever or whatever it was had been listening, waiting for that precise sound. Minutes passed, each one stretched and doubled by the dark. I paced the tiny rectangle of floor space, replaying the photos from earlier in my mind, the figure beside Jordan on the beach, the same rigid pose, that same sense of being watched from just outside the limits of explanation. I tried to smother my anxiety with reason, telling myself it had to be a coincidence, a product of nerves splintered by the last few months. Still, I had no appetite for sleep. All I could do was wait for the first pale blush of morning through the curtains. When I finally drifted off, it was into a ragged half-sleep. I dreamed of someone knocking on glass, a hand pressed palm flat against my bedroom window, smearing condensation around my name scrawled in the fog. I dreamed of footsteps outside in the sand, circling the house, drawing closer and closer. Then a thud, heavy and close, on the stairs leading up to the main floor. I startled awake, heart tripping over itself. There were real footsteps overhead now, Jordan and her parents coming home, the warm, everyday sounds of keys, shoes, and laughter. Relief steadied my nerves. Nothing sinister, just a family returning from dinner. I exhaled quietly, feeling foolish and very young. But that feeling, the sense of being hunted from the edges of the world, stayed with me as I climbed the stairs the next morning, blinking into sunlight as if to prove that reality was, in fact, safe and solid. At breakfast, Jordan's mother asked how I'd slept. I lied, of course, said it was peaceful, that the sound of waves was the best lullaby. Later, I joined Jordan and Cassie for another walk along the water, watching sand crabs scurry from our shadows, daring myself not to check over my shoulder every 5 steps. The beach felt crowded by weekend standards, strangers orbiting us in loose, shifting clusters, yet none of them quite fitting the silhouette I'd stored in my memory. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking just out of sight. Late in the afternoon, as storm clouds rolled over the horizon, I sat alone on the back deck, watching the sky, unable to relax. I thought about texting Rima, but stopped, unwilling to relive the fear or pass it along. I wondered if she was back to normal, or if she, too, was haunted by things both seen and unseen. When night fell again, I layered a chair under the knob of my guest room door, feeling ridiculous but refusing to relent. It was a meager defense, against what, I couldn't say. I drifted off listening for footsteps, my own private sentry duty never entirely letting down my guard, even as sleep finally came to claim me. It's strange how fast instinct takes over when logic has run its course. The body remembers danger, even when the mind insists there's nothing left to fear. The next evening, I was alone again at the house. Jordan and her family had gone out to celebrate her father's birthday at a seafood place downtown, inviting me along, but I gently declined. "I'm just wiped out," jet lag finally hit me, I said, trying to make my voice sound airy and convincing. The blessing of solitude was what I thought I wanted, just to read in peace and recharge. But twilight settled in with unwelcome heaviness. I locked every window in the guest room before dusk, checked the back door twice, and stacked my suitcase beside the bed, some part of me certain that weight was a barrier, a physical assurance, no matter how foolish. With the house empty, each creak sounded louder, the old pipes groaned and the fridge's hum felt like a warning. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, letting my mind float above reality, but I kept flashing back to the tapping from the night before, to those indistinct dreams that felt almost like memories. It wasn't until the sun had long set, the world outside lost to shadow, that it happened, the rapid tapping again, this time coming from the hallway side of my door, not from the window. There was no mistaking it now, deliberate, calculated, persistent. 4 knocks in a slow, even rhythm. My heart seized in my chest, a cold static burning across my skin. I lay frozen, staring at the door, the tiny gap of light spilling underneath it illuminating nothing but terror. I forced myself up, voice caught tight in my throat. "Who's there?" I managed, barely above a whisper. Silence answered first. Then, as if in reply, another soft knock. I checked my phone's lock screen, no texts from anyone, no calls coming through. The world outside my room was silent save for the sea in the distance and the hushed pulse of fear trying to drown out rational thought. I crept to the door, pressed my ear against the thin wood, straining for any clue of breath on the other side. For a few seconds, the quiet was overwhelming, until a sudden shifting squeak in the hallway jolted me backward. Immediately, I pictured the man from the photos, the beach, the festival, a shape that always existed just at the edge. Was it paranoia, or the way he'd always seemed to hover nearby, unknowable, a shadow without a name? Suddenly, clear as day, I heard footsteps moving away, slow, measured, retreating. Every hair on my arm stood on end. The urge to call Jordan, to dial 911, warred with the fear of confirming something truly wrong was happening. I stayed motionless for a long time, waiting for the comfort of voices or the hum of a car's engine as the family returned. At last, headlights swept the wall through the slatted blinds. Jordan's familiar steps echoed through the house, breaking the spell. She flung the door open, concern carving fresh lines across her face. "Hey, you okay? You look pale." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, afraid of the undertow that truth might bring if the words spilled out. As everyone settled in for the night, laughter and casual chat tried to reset the normalcy in the house. But when midnight crept around again, sleep eluded me. I kept flashing back to the feeling of a presence just outside my door, of those footsteps in the hall that didn't belong to anyone I knew. Sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., I finally surrendered to exhaustion. The morning was gray and blank, and I felt as if I hadn't really slept at all. Jordan brought coffee, cracked a joke about my haunted look, but I just smiled thinly. I wondered if I should say more, gather the courage to explain the fear that was becoming habit, but I swallowed the words. Years later, I would come to realize that this was the true cost of fear, not just what you survive, but what you carry, silent and heavy, long after the moment is over. A few months after I returned home from San Diego, I tried to convince myself the shadows had faded. Every therapist's cliché echoed in my mind: exposure, acceptance, moving forward, but the truth is that the residue of fear lingers long after logic returns. My routines became armor: locked doors, drawn blinds, headphones piping in soft music to drown out the silence that used to comfort me. I didn't talk much to anyone about the nights at Jordan's house, or the blurry man in the festival crowds, or the sense that sometimes terror is not just a thing you remember, but a habit you can't unlearn. Life pressed forward. I wrapped myself in tasks, work, errands, dinner plans. I turned down invitations more often than I accepted. But somewhere under all that performance, I waited for the next time reality might crack at the edges and let something menacing leak in. 6 months after San Diego, my partner Serena and I decided we needed a weekend to reset. She suggested Palm Springs, promising sun, solitude, and the kind of calm that feels earned. "We just need to get out of our heads," she laughed, already scrolling Airbnb listings. I wanted to laugh with her, wanted to believe the sun would burn away what still clung to me. We found a slick, modern rental, concrete floors, whitewashed walls, all open and angular. The backyard had a pool framed by cheap string lights, with a view of distant desert hills and the promise of privacy. The listing raved about perfect seclusion. That sounded like exactly what I needed. We arrived late on a Friday, hauling bags up the gravel walkway, and entered the code the host had texted. The inside was exactly as pictured: staged, scentless, comfort distilled down to IKEA and efficiency. I watched Serena's shoulders loosen as she settled in. Maybe things really would be okay. For once, nothing happened on the first night. We went out for dinner, then came back to sit by the pool, trading stories and letting the stillness wrap around us. No distant music, no footsteps, no one moving just out of sight. Eventually, the cool desert air chased us inside, and we dozed off in each other's arms. My sleep was deep, blank, no nightmares, not even dreams, just darkness. But by the second night, the silence acquired a new texture. I woke just after 2 a.m. certain I'd heard something, a soft, rhythmic shuffling, like hands tracing along the outside walls. I listened, barely breathing, expecting the noise to repeat. But instead, only the hush of the AC and Serena's slow breathing beside me. I told myself it was the wind, a dry gust bumping some stray pool toy along the stucco outside. In the morning I laughed about it, told Serena I must have been dreaming. We drank coffee in the sprawling kitchen, light streaming over the countertops, and made plans to do nothing at all. That's the kind of relief I so rarely allowed myself, just finding a corner of the world where nothing bad could possibly happen. For a while, we lay by the pool, dozing in the sun, the shadow of cacti crawling slowly across our feet. I let myself melt into the ordinary calm, almost believed the universe had finally let me go. But that night, everything changed. Around midnight, as Serena drifted off, I lay scrolling through messages, then noticed a sudden brightness flicker along the base of the blinds. Not headlights they would have swept on by, but a steady, sharp pulse. I got up, curiosity and dread pulling me to the living room's big glass doors. In the backyard, the security lights blazed on and off. I stood unmoving for a long time, watching the light stutter, suspecting nothing. But as the seconds stretched, my unease grew. The sensor lights were only supposed to respond to movement. I checked the time, almost 12:40. My heart thudded in my chest, anxiety or adrenaline, I couldn't tell. Serena woke, bleary-eyed. "What's going on?" "I think someone's outside," I whispered, barely able to meet her eyes. We watched together, not moving the blinds, afraid to draw attention. Another motion light snapped on by the storage shed at the fence line, then off again. In that silence, the vulnerability of glass and locks was suddenly stark. I pulled Serena close, counting every shadow as a possible face, every creak as a step. The two of us pressed up against the wall, barely daring to breathe, every sense sharpened by the idea, even if not yet the sight, of someone close by. The room felt both impossibly vast and claustrophobic all at once, as if the darkness outside the glass was pressing, soft but insistent, against the fragile sense of sanctuary we'd built inside. I put a finger to my lips when Serena started to speak, and we both listened, only the hum of the fridge, the faint mechanical ticking of the pool filter, the echo of my own heart. But then, quietly, we heard it, a single, heavy footstep against stone. Then another. Some living thing was there, testing the perimeters of our evening. For an absurd moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a coyote or oversized raccoon, but when the sensor light along the side yard flared and held steady, the shape it cast against the wall was unmistakably human, tall, wide at the shoulders, unmoving. Serena's hand clamped onto mine so hard it hurt. I didn't move. I couldn't move, not even to pull her away, let alone to yell or turn on more lights. I realized then how silence can be both a weapon and a shield. For a long moment, the figure just stood there beyond the fence, breathing, shifting its weight as if deciding what to do next. Finally, the lights went out. Just pure, swallowing darkness. When my eyes adjusted, the night pressed closer, colorless and dense. We waited, counting seconds, then minutes, neither of us ready to believe that was the end of it. At last, driven by a force greater than fear, I inched toward the sliding glass door, staring out into the blackness. Nothing. I saw only the shimmer of the pool and the line of the fence etched faintly by moonlight. I shut and relocked every door and window I could find, my motions calculated, nearly silent. No talking, just a dance of glances and head shakes between Serena and me. We moved through the house together, checking every closet, under every bed, behind the sleek, angular furniture until we landed back in the bedroom, backs pressed against the headboard as if it could keep us safe. We spent the rest of that night in a vigil, never giving in to true sleep, only dozing in brief, paranoid stretches. Every time my eyes closed, I jolt awake, convinced the man in black was standing at the foot of our bed, waiting for a sign to come in. At one point, Serena whispered, "What if he's in the backyard shed?" Her words hiccuped with genuine terror, and I realized I'd been thinking the same all along. By sunrise, our nerves were beyond frayed, but daybreak didn't dissolve the fear, it changed it. The house looked harmless again, the desert a drowsy sweep of gold and tan, the footprints gone or lost in the sand. We didn't dare venture outside right away, but we saw nothing from the windows. No one lurked at the perimeter, nothing obvious was taken or even disturbed. When Serena finally persuaded me to go outside, my shoes crunched on the gravel path along the side of the house. There, just out of sight of the back door, were unmistakable imprints, shoe prints long, deep, deliberate, angling from the fence to the storage shed. I knelt down, goosebumps racing across my shoulders as I traced a print with my hand. It was too big to be Serena's, or mine, or any of the neighbors' kids we'd glimpsed from a distance. The track stopped right at the shed's padlocked door. Serena hovered back by the house. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I stared at the shed, at the prints halted before it, at the way the door was still locked as if nothing had happened. Adrenaline had fizzled into a resigned, static dread. I shook my head. "We leave it. We don't touch anything. We call someone." Maybe it was just paranoia, trauma training me to see a pattern where coincidence lived. But I could feel that old certainty, the lesson hardwired by fear: when the world starts making you look over your shoulder, it's never only your imagination. Not when you know, deep down, that someone out there might be thinking just as intently about you. Back inside, the atmosphere between Serena and me had changed, charged, brittle, almost electric with the need to act but the dread of doing anything wrong. My reflection in the living room mirror was pale, drawn, older than the day before. Serena was pacing, her arms tightly crossed, glancing from the hallway to me and back, over and over. "Do we call the police?" she whispered. It was half question, half plea. I nodded, already dialing. I'd always resisted being the person to escalate things, to invite in the authorities, but the memory of that dark, unmoving figure was heavy on my chest. The dispatcher's voice was odd in its calmness, asking our address, details, whether anyone was an immediate threat. She told us to stay inside, keep all doors and windows locked, and that someone would be there as soon as possible. Every minute we waited was an hour stretched tight with tension. We sat mutely on the couch, listening for sounds from the yard, the scrape of shoes on gravel, the jangle of metal, anything at all. I was aware, with ugly clarity, that the glass sliding doors at the back of the house might as well have been tissue paper. I reached over and moved the suitcase and a dining chair against the track, just to feel like I'd done something. Serena squeezed my hand, her palm icy. Headlights finally slashed across the curtains. 2 police officers filled the entryway, one tall, one shorter and stouter, polite but tired. They ushered us to the kitchen, taking notes as we recounted the night, the footsteps, the lights, the prints, the shed. Their questions were gentle, routine, but their eyes kept drifting to the windows too. After searching the yard with flashlights, they disappeared out of sight for a while. Serena and I sat holding our breath until they returned, faces set and unreadable. "No one out there now," the tall officer told us. "Shed's locked tight. We saw the prints, probably someone passing through, maybe looking for a place to crash. Sometimes these rentals get targeted since people think they're empty between guests." He saw the look on my face and added, not unkindly, "If you're uncomfortable, we'd advise you pack up and find a hotel tonight. You did the right thing calling." That settled it. We spent the next frantic 40 minutes packing, flinching at every normal sound: zipper, suitcase wheels, even the wind shushing against the eaves. Before we left, the shorter officer asked, "Either of you leave this anywhere?" He dangled a battered baseball cap between his thumb and forefinger. It was sun-bleached, with no team logo, and neither Serena nor I had ever seen it before. It was behind the living room sofa. Could have been a previous guest, or maybe. He trailed off, and the implication curled in my gut like a cold finger. Had someone actually come inside while we slept, while we showered, while we'd assumed the only ghosts in this place were old insecurities? We shook our heads, unable to speak. The officer let the subject drop, but as we turned to gather the last of our things, Serena's hand went instinctively to her mouth in a silent gasp. I knew what she'd realized: someone hadn't just peered in at us, someone had been inside. Maybe an hour ago, maybe last night, maybe, God forbid, several times. The truth would always be incomplete. We fled for a cheap motel in the center of Palm Springs, a tired relic with 2 bright lights and a broken ice machine, but it felt secure in a way the expensive house no longer could. We piled our bags under the window and let the tired, familiar rhythm of cable TV chase out the terrors for a while. The following morning, with sun slanting through dusty curtains, I called our Airbnb host. Told him what happened, asked if he'd noticed anything strange, if anyone else had keys or access. The response was chillier than expected: a single read receipt, no reply. I let the silence fill in the answer for me. Airbnb support was more receptive. They refunded the last night after the police report number was given. Still, it was a hollow victory. What I wanted to ask, what haunted me most, had no answer. Back inside, the atmosphere between Serena and me had changed: charged, brittle, almost electric with the need to act but the dread of doing anything wrong. My reflection in the living room mirror was pale, drawn, older than the day before. Serena was pacing, her arms tightly crossed, glancing from the hallway to me and back, over and over. "Do we call the police?" she whispered. It was half question, half plea. I nodded, already dialing. I'd always resisted being the person to escalate things, to invite in the authorities, but the memory of that dark, unmoving figure was heavy on my chest. The dispatcher's voice was odd in its calmness, asking our address, details, whether anyone was an immediate threat. She told us to stay inside, keep all doors and windows locked, and that someone would be there as soon as possible. Every minute we waited was an hour stretched tight with tension. We sat mutely on the couch, listening for sounds from the yard: the scrape of shoes on gravel, the jangle of metal, anything at all. I was aware, with ugly clarity, that the glass sliding doors at the back of the house might as well have been tissue paper. I reached over and moved the suitcase and a dining chair against the track, just to feel like I'd done something. Serena squeezed my hand, her palm icy. Headlights finally slashed across the curtains. 2 police officers filled the entryway, one tall, one shorter and stouter, polite but tired. They ushered us to the kitchen, taking notes as we recounted the night, the footsteps, the lights, the prints, the shed. Their questions were gentle, routine, but their eyes kept drifting to the windows too. After searching the yard with flashlights, they disappeared out of sight for a while. Serena and I sat holding our breath until they returned, faces set and unreadable. "No one out there now," the tall officer told us. "Shed's locked tight. We saw the prints, probably someone passing through, maybe looking for a place to crash. Sometimes these rentals get targeted since people think they're empty between guests." He saw the look on my face and added, not unkindly, "If you're uncomfortable, we'd advise you pack up and find a hotel tonight." You did the right thing calling. That settled it. We spent the next frantic 40 minutes packing, flinching at every normal sound: zipper, suitcase wheels, even the wind shushing against the eaves. Before we left, the shorter officer asked, "Either of you leave this anywhere?" He dangled a battered baseball cap between his thumb and forefinger. It was sun-bleached, with no team logo, and neither Serena nor I had ever seen it before. It was behind the living room sofa. Could have been a previous guest, or maybe. He trailed off, and the implication curled in my gut like a cold finger. Had someone actually come inside while we slept, while we showered, while we'd assumed the only ghosts in this place were old insecurities? We shook our heads, unable to speak. The officer let the subject drop, but as we turned to gather the last of our things, Serena's hand went instinctively to her mouth in a silent gasp. I knew what she'd realized: someone hadn't just peered in at us, someone had been inside. Maybe an hour ago, maybe last night, maybe, God forbid, several times. The truth would always be incomplete. We fled for a cheap motel in the center of Palm Springs, a tired relic with 2 bright lights and a broken ice machine, but it felt secure in a way the expensive house no longer could. We piled our bags under the window and let the tired, familiar rhythm of cable TV chase out the terrors for a while. The following morning, with sun slanting through dusty curtains, I called our Airbnb host. Told him what happened, asked if he'd noticed anything strange, if anyone else had keys or access. The response was chillier than expected, a single read receipt, no reply. I let the silence fill in the answer for me. Airbnb support was more receptive. They refunded the last night after the police report number was given. Still, it was a hollow victory. What I wanted to ask, what haunted me most, had no answer. We drove back into town the next day, the strangeness of the night before still clinging to us like a bitter perfume. Streets we'd explored just days earlier looked different, emptier, somehow more dangerous. I kept catching myself in the car's side mirror, expecting to spot someone watching from the curb, but of course there was nothing. Serena tried to banter, to lighten the mood, but even her laughter was brittle, fraying at the edges. My own thoughts looped, stuck between rational explanations and the old, gnawing certainty that something had shifted in us for good. We checked into a cheap chain motel, as beige and unremarkable as possible. I found comfort in that blandness, in the mundane thrum of traffic and the pit-pat of rain streaking down plastic windows. No designer sofa, no fancy pool, just 4 solid walls and locks that looked like they'd been tested by 100 desperate travelers before us. Serena asked, "Are you okay?" for what felt like the 15th time, and for the first time since the festival all those months before, I was tempted to say yes. Not because I was fine, but because she needed me to be, and because admitting fear isn't the same as inviting it. We settled into a routine, finishing what was left of our trip. Museums, breakfast diners, half-hearted hikes. We snapped pictures like tourists and let the dust of the desert collect on our shoes. Every night, though, as we closed the motel door, I wedged a chair under the handle, a ritual Serena accepted without question or comment. When we finally returned home, some small part of me expected to leave the experience in the past. But bad stories, true stories, don't end just because you want them to. In the weeks that followed, the smallest things triggered old dread: a neighbor taking out trash after dark, footsteps echoing in the apartment corridor, an unfamiliar van in the driveway. Even as I unpacked, folded my laundry, watered the plants, I could feel it, the subtle vibration of anxiety, as if I was waiting for the world to go dark again. Serena and I never really talked at length about what happened. Occasionally, when the silence between us grew too heavy, she'd ask, "Do you think it was the same person from the first night, or was there anything you wish you'd done differently?" I never told her how. Some nights, I'd wake around 2 a.m. that same hour listening, straining, sure I'd hear a tap at the window or a jostle at the lock. Instead, I'd reassure her, and myself, that we'd been smart, that maybe fear was part of how we kept ourselves alive. But the truth, what I never said aloud, was simpler. It wasn't just the sounds or shadows that haunted me. It was the idea, not proven, not even fully formed, that maybe this was never about a single man on a single night. Maybe it was a story stretching over years and miles, through Coachella and beach towns and desert Airbnbs, stitched into my life by chance and something darker. A reminder that even the tightest locks can do nothing against the uncertainty that sometimes walks on 2 legs in the night. There's an old saying, once you've been marked, you never stop looking over your shoulder. I'd heard it before, dismissed it as melodrama. But now it was a drumbeat in my bones, a private rhythm always clicking beneath every small, happy moment. I found myself double-checking everything: locks, phone batteries, the car alarm at night, the names on hotel guest lists. At first, I worried I'd never be able to shut off that vigilance. Over time, it became habit, a dark little friend sitting just out of sight. One last thing. A week after we returned home, a package arrived addressed to me, forwarded from our old apartment building. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, just a photo of the Palm Springs rental, pool slick with rain in the early dawn, and at the very edge of the frame, near the shed, a familiar silhouette, dark and indistinct as ever. There was nothing threatening written, no way to trace it. But as I sat there holding the photo, heart hammering wild against my ribs, I realized it didn't matter. Sometimes, the scariest stories are simply the ones that don't end how we want. Not with answers. Not with closure. But only with the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone else is always watching just at the edge of the frame. After that, life tried its best to return to normal. There were months in which nothing much happened, and I almost let myself believe I'd outrun the shadow, that the world was finally done testing the borders of my safety. Work picked up, seasons changed, friendships deepened into a rhythm that felt strong enough to carry the weight of the past. Yet even in my happiest moments, every echo in an unfamiliar hallway, every flicker caught in my peripheral, would summon back the old uncertainty. There were nights when Serena and I would plan a getaway somewhere new, somewhere bright, and I'd still find myself researching crime statistics, studying floor plans, checking reviews for any mention of unfriendly strangers or break-ins. I told myself it was practical, being smart in a dangerous world. But I knew, in corners I didn't say out loud, what it really was, the residue of experience, the invisible tattoo left by being seen in the wrong way, by the wrong person. One rainy Saturday in November, we visited a crowded art market on the edge of the city. The kind of place thick with color and music, smells of coffee and rain. For a while, the noise and warmth of the crowd dissolved every edge. I let myself believe I was safe, that life was a collection of normal, even beautiful, days stacked one after another. I wandered between booths, losing myself in paintings, ceramics, small talk. But then, in a reflection caught in the corner of a vendor's mirror, I saw it again, a shape I thought I recognized. A dark jacket, posture familiar, hanging back at the edge. No face this time, no chasing eyes, just a presence. My breath caught. The air closed in. Instead of letting panic roll me, I reminded myself of all the progress I'd made. I reached for Serena's hand, squeezed it, grounded myself in the trust and connection we'd built together. This is the hardest lesson survival can teach you, that it's possible to be afraid and still keep going. That ghosts, real or not, don't get to write your entire story. Even if their outlines are inked into every page. We finished at the market, went out into the world, and nothing bad happened. We walked home in the rain, laughing, sharing memories, making plans for trips next summer. Still, that old instinct whispered, look back before you turn the last corner, check your keys in your pocket, touch your phone once before you head up the stairs. I did all of that, and then, as if in defiance of fear itself, I did something else. I told Serena the whole story, from the festival to the beaches to the desert, speaking every darkness aloud. My voice trembled, but as I reached the end, I realized the story no longer owned me. I owned it. A few nights later, I lay awake, the city quiet, lights from passing cars painting gentle bands across our bedroom ceiling. Against the sound of rain and distant voices, I considered what it meant to heal. Healing isn't a straight line, it bends and blurs, sometimes moving backward before it claws forward again. I remembered the girl who left for Coachella with nothing but hope and a handful of plans. I remembered each version of myself left behind in beach towns, airports, desert rentals, each one marked, yes, but also more aware, more cautious, and, above all, still here. Sometimes I think of the others who might have stories like mine. Maybe you felt it too, the gut punch of an ordinary setting suddenly made uncanny, the sense that you're being watched when you can't prove a thing. You start to understand why people cling to ritual, to superstition, to boundaries that can't truly protect them but can offer a threadbare sense of control. You learn, with practice, to live alongside your own vigilance, neither denying it nor letting it devour you. On nights when sleep finally comes easy, I don't dream of shadows or open doors. I dream of bright places, of crowds happy and anonymous, of friends' laughter loud enough to drown anything that lingers just out of sight. And when I wake, I'm reminded that every day I build a life beyond fear, I'm reclaiming part of the world for myself. Little by little. Day by cautious, deliberate day. This is how the years move on. You don't erase what haunted you, you learn it can't define you. The story of my 20s isn't only a chain of close calls and strangers at the threshold. It's the late-night drives with friends, shared sunrises, ordinary days made richer not because they were always safe but because I survived despite everything that lingered out of sight. I kept living, holidays filled with laughter, new friendships formed over spilled drinks and dashed ex-lovers, job interviews that made my hands shake, streets wandered far past midnight with the reckless confidence of the young. And there were more trips, too, with more layers of ritual, locks double-checked, neighbors introduced, every Airbnb's yard circled before bed. I once thought this meant I'd failed to move on, that I'd let the shadows win. But I see now that's not the case at all. Fear became a language. I learned its dialects, heard its warnings, but I never let it dictate the stories I wrote for myself. There were setbacks. I'll admit that. Nights when Serena found me frozen by a sudden sound, afternoons when the light shifted and brought a memory roaring back. I'd pace for minutes by the apartment door, listening, telling myself each echo was ordinary, the product of old buildings and thin walls. But what matters most is that I didn't let fear close my world. Instead, it taught me to be awake in it. There is a strange, unexpected comfort in vigilance, a discipline, almost. I became someone who looked out for others, who told friends to trust their instincts, who never rolled her eyes at stories that began, I know this sounds crazy, but... The festival was only the start. The beaches, the Airbnbs, the silent watches at rented windows, they all blurred into a single thread of experience, woven through with every survival, every anxious laugh after a close call, every slow walk into an empty house. Sometimes I wondered about the man in black, if he remembered me, if he marked a calendar in secret for people he'd once watched. More often, I wondered about all the people whose paths never crossed mine, all the stories left unwritten because routine kept them safe, because chance spared them. It's tempting to let your mind knot itself around questions with no gentle answers. Who was he? Did he follow me more than I knew? Was there ever a reason, or was I simply visible to the wrong set of eyes at the wrong time? The truth is, I'll never know. Life doesn't always offer closure. Sometimes the only conclusion is that you're still standing, wiser and scarred, but carrying stories instead of wounds. My world grew both smaller and wider. Places once effortless now required courage, alleyways at dusk, music festivals, solitary check-ins at hotels. But places I never dared enter before, community self-defense classes, group trips with other women, conversations with strangers who carried themselves with the wary, undercover pride of those who'd once felt too seen, opened up as if waiting for me. I found new versions of bravery, not the loud, cinematic kind, but the steady, daily type that comes from choosing to live out loud in a world that isn't always friendly. There was a day, years later, when I took a train across the country. I watched unfamiliar towns flicker by in the dawn, receding in the gray velvet of the windows, and caught my own reflection layered over the world outside. I saw someone alert, not afraid, watchful, not haunted. I smiled to myself. I'd made it this far. That's a fact no ghost story can erase. If you're listening to this, maybe because you, too, have carried a shadow, or wondered if anyone else saw the things you did, know that you're not alone. The world can be dangerous, yes, but it's also full of allies, of safe rooms, of small acts of defiance against the dark. Fear is a teacher, not a prison. Be careful, but do not shrink. Trust your story. Give fear its name, but never your future. For everyone who's ever been watched, or wondered about footsteps in the night, I hope you find your light. I have found mine, again and again, and that is how I know that even the scariest stories can become only chapters, never the end.